Welcome back to the Enjoy the Walk podcast, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a special guest with us to talk golf course architecture and a special project going on down in Texas. You might have heard of him. He spent some time with the Golf Channel, spent some time on the PGA Tour, and even won a few times. Forbes calls him the Da Vinci of sports commentators. So happy to have Brandel Chamblee on the show. Brandel, thanks for taking the time. Excited to dive into your project.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it, both you guys. So, I just flew home from the East Coast yesterday. I'm in Scottsdale. I got a little time off, but we're about to dive into this project, and very much looking forward to getting it started.
That's exciting. Between Arizona and Texas, you're spending a little bit more time in the warmer weather than we are.
Yeah. Well, I do fly up there for work. Our studio is in Stamford, Connecticut. So, maybe for the first time in my life, I bought a long length heavy coat last year. I've not grown up, and I have not really spent much time in cold weather. So I can sympathize with what you guys endure for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure you're happy to leave that coat at home when you take the trip back to the warm weather.
Yeah, I'm outdoors every day doing something or trying to be, and it's a little hard to do that. When I start, let's see, from January, when I flew up there last year on January, I don't know, it was below zero or something. It was like, yeah, we're not spending any time outdoors up there. Now I know why everybody's so smart up there. They just stay indoors and read and think.
Or are they smart because they're still up there and not in warm weather?
Fair point. Fair point.
Well, speaking of warm weather, you spent a good time of your college years at the University of Texas at Austin. Obviously, this project taking place in Texas as well. Talk us a little bit. You said before we hopped on here, had the idea for well over a decade. Talk us through like the initial idea concept and why it's been such a focal point for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea first sort of popped into my head about a decade ago when I was asked to go over and be a lead analyst for the Founders Cup, the inaugural year, 2011. Judy Rankin is ordinarily the lead analyst, but her husband felt ill that week, so I was asked to go fill in. And there were two holes on the back nine there that were meant to be drivable. They were 300, 330, somewhere in that range, but they didn't end up setting them up in the 260, 290 yardage for the women to have a go at it. And that kind of surprised me. So I started looking at the differences between the length of the courses played on the LPGA Tour and the length of the courses played on the PGA Tour. And what I found, at least in my estimation, was that too often they either play golf courses or the golf courses were set up in such a way that they disincentivize heroic play on the LPGA Tour. And, if I looked even further, I noticed a disparity in scoring average between the LPGA Tour and the PGA Tour, which you can't convince me for a second that it has anything to do with skill level. I think it has everything to do with the design of the golf courses and the way they're set up. Just in the last 4 years, if you look at the LPGA Tour, only 6 women on average have averaged under 70. And if you look at the same time period for the PGA Tour, using the actual scoring averages, because in the LPGA Tour, they don't use adjusted. The PGA Tour has adjusted and actual, but in actual scoring average, there's been 38 on average, men average under 70. And that disparity comes down to, again, at least in my view and the data that I've parsed through, it's too often that the trajectories of approach shots are flatter with less spin rate, lower spin rate. And that leads to balls finishing farther away from the hole, less exciting birdie putts made, less exciting eagle putts made, and subsequently higher scoring averages. So it's not just about yardage. I mean, I singled out yardage to show the disparity. Like the average PGA Tour course is 7,200 yards long. The average LPGA course is 6,400 yards long. That 800 yards doesn't come anywhere close to creating an equitable playing field for LPGA and PGA Tour players. But it's not just about yardage. It's about the placement of bunkers, the severity of bunkers, pitches of fairway where tee shots are landing, and so forth. And I have examples for all of those. And so again, I thought, it surprised me that the LPGA didn't have their equivalent of the TPC Sawgrass, their course at their home, designed for them, and to give the women the best possible stage under the brightest possible lights. And, look, when I wrote the book that I wrote, The Anatomy of Greatness, the reason I wrote it is because it didn't exist and I wanted to read it. And so I thought, well, heck, I'll just write the book. And this course doesn't exist, and I've waited for it to get designed, and it hasn't. And, I joined with Agustin Pizá last year, and we have projects going. But when we broached this subject with an investor in South Texas, his eyes lit up. We took it to the city council. The city council loved it. All of them, every one of them, economic development, city manager, aviation experts, the mayor, they all loved it. They wanted in. They thought golf needed to be more inclusive. Since then I've talked to Amazon about it. Amazon loves it. They want to get in on it. That's, we're in the early stages of this, and it will evolve, no doubt. But the course is going to get built either way, and we're going to build it for the best women players. Lorena Ochoa is now part of our design team. I can say she has a great rapport, I should say, with Agustin Pizá. And it's very cool to have Lorena Ochoa be a part of this project.
Well, there's so many exciting things to unpack of kind of what you just went over, as I'm sure a Spark Notes version of the entirety of everything going on. You mentioned, and I think, you'll have, as you always do, a lot of data to kind of go into the golf course architecture side of things. One of the things that popped out to me when going over just the challenges to build something that specifically caters to the LPGA as opposed to the PGA was not only just the movement of bunkers and hazards and whatnot, but the way you talked about tilted fairways and approach shots and different things there. Can you talk to us a little bit about, the partnership with Agustin Pizá and how you're really looking into challenging these women players that just differs from a lot of golf course architecture that we see on the PGA Tour?
Yeah. So, Augie, I met Augie 4 or 5 years ago, and I followed him on social media. And, as much as I don't like social media, it is a wonderful way to get a sense of who somebody is. So I've watched him and I've looked at his projects, and he's a fellow who's not afraid to create, I think, original and unique projects. He has golf concept projects all over Mexico. He has wellness golf down at a place called Chamblee in Mexico. And yet his architecture, he's an incredibly smart person. He was trained as a vertical architect. He has a degree in vertical architecture first at the University of Monterrey, which is the premier university in Latin America. And after graduating with a degree in vertical architecture and spending time there, he fell in love with golf. So he decided to go get a master's degree in horizontal architecture, golf course architecture at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And he's one of just 3 people in the entire world who's a member of both the European Golf Course Architecture Society and the American Golf Course Architecture Society. They don't just let you be members. You have to be involved in projects all over the world to have that done. So he's a very smart guy, very creative, and I've loved the designs that I've seen. He's won numerous awards. One of them was for a redesign, and in particular, it had a short drivable par 4. This is down on the border and just across the border in Mexico. Short drivable par 4 that I thought was one of the prettiest holes I've ever seen. So, we started talking, and I had written about how to approach the controversy of increased distances by changing the setups of golf courses on the PGA Tour. And I think it just boils down to math. It boils down to dispersion numbers. It boils down to club head speed. It boils down to angles of attack. It boils down to trajectory. I think math. And look, this is where art and science meet, where math and utility meet. And I'm looking at it purely from an sort of an academic standpoint, but there's certainly an artistic view. So he reached out to me. He's the artist. He's kind of the right brain guy, and I'm more the left brain guy. And so we formed a partnership, and we have a really cool project going on in Mexico. It's a butterfly effect. We call it the butterfly effect for two different reasons. One, it's the metaphor saying, a butterfly can flap its wings in the Amazon, and it can cause a hurricane to hit in, New York. That's a metaphor. It's a parable, but it's also in some way it has these loops, and you put the loops together, it almost looks like a butterfly. We're building 4 6-hole loops. It's because 1, that gives us 7 different 18-hole golf course options, but 2, it allows people to play any number of golf holes they want to play. I mean, if they want to play 3, they can do that, but mostly they can play 6 holes in an hour and a half, or they can go play 12, or they can play 18, and so forth. And those designs are a couple hours out, about an hour and a half outside of Monterrey, Mexico, and we break ground there after the first of this year. So Augie reached out to me, and he was curious about this design, and I started taking him through some of the design aspects that are built for men and a handicap to women. For example, the 18th hole at Augusta National, obviously designed to test the best players in the world. The bunkers on the left are gaping. They're deep, 7-8 foot lips. At the Augusta National Women's Amateur, a few players drove it in that left bunker on the last day. 2 of them, Karen Fredgaard and Subasa Kajitani, drove it in there. They had, the tournaments, the championships hanging in the balance. They pondered the shot. They both hit their shots. They both hit the lip, and it went 50 yards down the fairway. They didn't come anywhere near getting on the green. And, we see scores of players drive it in that left bunker in the Masters and knock it onto the green. The bunkers weren't as deep, but they were a little farther away. In 1987, when Sandy Lyle hit his famous bunker shot out of there to 10 feet and made birdie. And I thought, that's not a difference in talent. That is just a difference in design. So the lip needs to be, accommodate a difference in trajectory for the best women player. It needs to have, if you start to look at what trajectory, the difference between trajectories for the best players on the LPGA and the PGA Tour, the difference in spin rate and the difference of angle of descent, you need about 30, 40 yards difference between the two to get the same sort of trajectory, spin rates, and angles of descent. So that bunker, not only does the lip need to be obviously a little bit shorter, a little bit lower, it needs to be a little bit closer to the bunker to accommodate the best women players. And so if you look at Evian, where they play the Evian Championship, that hole is not designed for the best women players. It's designed for the best men players or the men players. Women are almost always an afterthought. The tees are just moved up haphazardly. And so that fairway is severely pitched where their tee shots land. And so very often it hits in that fairway and goes all the way down into the rough. When the women played the KPMG LPGA Championship at Westchester Country Club in 2015, the same thing. The 18th hole, first of all, they could hardly get there in 2, when almost every man, when they play there, is able to get there in 2. The platform for heroics needs to be comparable for both tours because it affects perceptions, and it shouldn't. There's hardly anything more exciting than going for a drivable par 4. And getting it close and jumping up the leaderboard, or going for a par 5 and 2, or trying to attack a tucked pin. And if you don't have the accommodation for approach shots or pinch points or turn points on dog legs, you're not going to have the same sort of platform for heroics. So, as I've talked this over with Augie, it's like, wouldn't it be great if we looked at the parameters on the LPGA Tour? We had the turn points in the right spot. We had the bunkers in the right spot. We had the widths, the amount of rough at the right depth, the angles of the greens at the right places, the depth of greens at the right places for the right trajectories and spin rates, with beautifully artistic holes, with all of that sort of DNA in the design. And it just works out perfectly that the distances that the average LPGA players hit it are fairly comparable to the average recreational male golfer. So it's not like, this golf course is just going to be for women. The average male golfer is going to, they're going to have a club head speed of somewhere around 94, 95 miles an hour. And that's an average LPGA club head speed. Although, you start to look at Patty Tavatanik, Ann Van Dam, Lexi Thompson, Nelly Korda, their club head speeds get up into 108, 109. But that is the idea. That is the concept. Now, what that's going to look like, I'm not 100% sure, but that is the idea. And so that women are encouraged to take chances, that they can drive it over bunkers, that, they can cut corners. They can go for the, if you think about the last 3 holes at the Players Championship, 16, 17, and 18, and almost how every year the Players Championship is a very exciting finish, because those holes have great risk reward, a lot of water that causes cognitive chaos, and nobody can really decide whether they're great holes or terrible holes, and that I think that's, as a player, I hated that golf course. And I thought Pete Dye was one of the worst things that there was about golf. But as I've said, as a commentator, and I've watched the play unfold over almost 20 years since I've been covering golf, and I look at the integrity of that design, how almost every hole asks you to do one thing off of the tee and another thing into the green, and yet it has, it doesn't have natural landforms. None of that was a swamp. But Pete Dye built into, either with, dramatic mounds or dramatic bunkering or dramatic lakes and railroad ties, he gave you a shocking, incredibly well-designed golf course. So, and I'm not saying that's what the LPGA course is going to be. In my mind, I'm calling it the LPGA National, and we'll see if it ends up being called that. But I'm not saying that's what it's going to be, but those concepts will be percolating in the background as we, bring this golf course to fruition.
I think what's really kind of crazy, and Dante, you can speak on it too, is just the idea of how grand golf course architecture can be, but then conceptualizing the fact that everything down to the, launch angle off a hybrid or off a long iron for these ladies compared to what a men would hit, a 9 or an 8 iron out of the same course spot is taken into consideration. I think that is what's really, really incredible about the ability to affect golf course like outcomes and architecture overall.
I couldn't agree more. And I would think it's, I guess you can Brandel, you can possibly agree or disagree with me on this one, but the TrackMan aspect of it
definitely
allows you to get that data to now you're like, all right,
spot on.
Let me compare like a Dustin Johnson to an LPGA player and see what their angle of descent is, because it's crazy how much, these men and women, they go after numbers, right? Especially on the PGA, they go after all these numbers. They're hitting to a number. And back then it's kind of, to me, it seems like from my understanding and experience watching and learning the game is it was like a feel-based thing, but now it's like a numbers-based thing. And now these courses were always built to that, but now you can generalize and build to a course that is perfectly fit for this generic style of players.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. So to find the data, and look, the data on the LPGA Tour is not what it should be. That's another thing that is, I think, will be, addressed with our golf course. When I explain this to the executives at Amazon, trying to get, just in general, talking about the idea, they all lit up and said, we want to be involved. We want to put fiber optics under this golf course. So you got a plug-in aspect to TV, but otherwise to push data out on the same level with men. So data's out there, exactly how far balls carry, their trajectories, their angles of descent, the whole thing, club head speed, ball speed, all that, which will allow for the gambling aspect to get into the LPGA Tour, which it's pervading the PGA Tour. But yes, the data on the LPGA Tour is not as good as the data on the PGA Tour, but you could still find TrackMan, Flight Scope data out there. And the goal is, so you said a hybrid where Dustin Johnson probably hits a 7 iron. What does he hit it? Does he probably hit it close to 200 yards? 70, yeah, he's in the 190, probably 200 yards.
Yeah, 190, yeah.
Right. So if you look at his launch angle, spin rate, and angle of descent, And then you go to a comparable player, power player on the LPGA Tour, Patty Tavatanakit, and you think, okay, at what point does she get the same launch angle, the same spin rate, and the same angle of descent? So it's not going to be a hybrid. Mm-hmm. So you can't just make up for the difference between Patty Tavatanakit's tee shots and Dustin's, which would be, Dustin is in the he's not 320, he's 315 in that area. Patty Tavatanakit's 290. So, it's 25, 30 yards off the tee. You can't just make a tee in a different spot and think you've settled the problem, solved the problem. You can't. You have to account for the difference in trajectory, spin rate, and angle of descent. So where would that be? And what iron would she need to have in her hand to be able to stop a ball as fast as Dustin Johnson? And it would, is it a 7-iron? It might be just an 8-iron. It might be an 8-iron for her. And so that is the goal. And when I initially said 6,200 yards, because look, if we're going like for like, and PGA Tour courses are 7,200 yards long, and the average LPGA course is 6,400 yards long, that 800 yards difference does not come close to mitigating the differences. So I said 6,200 yards. I realized a lot of people are going to go, wait a minute, 6,200 is too short. Okay, that's a working number. If the golf course is fast or firm, obviously the course can play longer than that. But it's just to give you a general idea of the differences they're not equitable. Mm-hmm. And I'm, from a green standpoint, bunker standpoint, approach standpoint, that's the goal of this golf course. Of course, artistic shot values, strategy, intrigue, rise in level of emotions, all of that is a part of the design. But within the design, it's Dalton, to get exactly to what you're talking about.
It boggles my mind to really think that and I've just watched you do what you've done for so many years, and there are so many analytical standpoints of which everything has to be taken in to be considered to really make an impact. And when you talk about every aspect, it really starts to build this story of like where we've gotten a lot of questions as we've approached this story of this golf course and said, well, why can't they just commingle? Why can't we have the women at a TPC Sawgrass? Why can't we have the women at one of these other PGA Tour venues? And it seems like, over the last 10 minutes, you've answered really perfectly that question in itself of there's so many data points that just differ that moving the tees up don't make sense at all. And commingling
that doesn't
really
solve the problem.
Sense.
Yeah, it doesn't solve the problem. If you're going to test the very best players in the world on the men, and again, your pinch points, your turn points, they're likely going to be different. The depth of the bunkers is likely going to be different, not just in the fairway, but around the green. When you talk about the flash point, the speed that you need to get a ball up out of a bunker 10, 12 feet, and the ability to spin it. That boils down to speed. So it's, all that needs to be taken into account. And again, the goal is to present and is to give the women the best possible stage. I will say, if I think about, some of the most exciting shots in women's golf, one of them is Jennifer Kupcho at the Augusta National Women's Amateur, the inaugural on the 13th hole. Okay, but they had moved that hole up to where it played 460, and it was a reachable par 5, and it had, of course, it has incredible architectural elements within that hole. But there you have an example of a reachable par 5 for women at 460, which is what they should be in that neighborhood. And how often do you see women on the LPGA Tour playing a reachable par 5 at 460? No, they're 490, they're 510, they're 520, and it's like, okay, yeah, there's room for all of that, but if you consider that the difference on approach off the tee and on approach, it comes to not 40 yards, it's 80 yards or 100 yards. 460 is 550 for men. It's to find that equivalent, and there you had Jennifer Kupcho hit this incredible shot. And so there, it's heroic. It's interesting. It's fantastic. And there's less of that on the LPGA Tour and more of that on the PGA Tour. And it doesn't have a damn thing to do with skill level.
Well,
it has everything to do with design and setup.
As you zoom out too and look at the grand picture, as you start to talk about working fiber optics into the course and helping the LPGA move into the sports betting scene, you look at the heroics, and that's what really causes an uptick in viewership too. When Kupcho hit that shot, I remember it being spread all over social media and replayed on the Golf Channel time and time and time again. So it really starts to move the conversation towards exponential growth in a short period of time.
Let me ask you this, both of you. Tell me the equivalent on the LPGA Tour of the drive that Bryson DeChambeau hit at the Bay Hill, the sixth hole this year. Tell me the equivalent of Bryson DeChambeau's drive at the Ryder Cup on the fifth hole when he cut the corner on the par five. Tell me the LPGA equivalent of that. And it doesn't have a damn thing to do with skill level. It has everything to do with design and setup.
I really can't. The only thing I can think of is Anne Van Dam's swing being shown over and over again because of how hard she swings it.
Okay.
But not a specific shot on a golf course.
Right. Doesn't come to mind. There's no shot where you go, oh, why? It was Patty Tavatanica. Now, look, Patty Tavatanica, what she did at the A&A, it was fast course. It was hot, and she drove it well over 300 yards, and that got a lot of buzz. And she had some cool drives and some cool chips, and I was covering the Augusta National Women's Amateur that week and getting ready for the Masters. So I didn't get to watch as much of it as I wanted to. But afterwards, I went back and watched it. And I was like, that was really cool. Now imagine if she was able to cut a corner, or imagine if she was able to, to get to a par five that was designed with intrigue and heroics in mind. And that's what we're looking to do.
So you're basically looking now, taking like the question that you just asked us, and what's coming across my mind, you're not saying, Dalton said he's not saying the specific shot. Like we're kind of comparing to like the shot Bryson, like the excitement that comes out of the shot that Bryson took at the Ryder Cup, right? So
well, exactly. I'm not saying the same shot, not by a long
shot. It's the excitement from it, correct?
It's the excitement from it. So
I would say it's the women's Am at Augusta.
Yeah, of course, because that design is amazing. And
right.
and of course we have historical context immediately with every shot. So you put somebody in any fairway and in any situation, and I can, everybody can call up shots hit from there, both tragic and heroic. So there's historical context, but beside that, there's great integrity to the design. But as you get to the 18th hole and you look at that bunker or drive it down the bunker on 1 or the bunker on 5, those lips, those bunkers are too deep. So there has to be some accommodation for the difference in trajectory, spin rates, and angles of descent. I mean, the golf course itself has the potential to put them in a platform of heroics, as we saw at the 13th. But imagine that concept at 13 over all 18 holes. And that's obviously what I want to do. That's what I'm aiming at. That's the goal. That's the aim.
Well, I think as you look back on the comments made in that golf.com article too, it really starts to speak to why you consider it the TPC Sawgrass for the LPGA, because that was a built for TV course, a stadium course meant to host events. And it seems like this is the same concept on a grand scale for the women. And it's really neat to see, as we've talked through kind of the gears behind everything, the relevance that this could truly have for the women's game in a short period of time.
Right. So if you look at that golf course, if you go like at the beginning when Pete Dye built that golf course was not built for the average player. And the average player is going to go out there and just get abused, beat up, annihilated, psychologically scarred. It was designed to test and cause the best players in the world to have nightmares. Okay. So when it was first built, nobody liked it. No tour player liked it. They hated it because it got in your head. Famously, Jerry Pate, who was the first Players Championship to win there. You guys all know what he did. He threw Pete Dye in the water. He threw Dean Beeman in the water. It was their brainchild, right? And he threw in their head. And he threw him in the water because everybody was complaining about the course. Well, over time, the course has softened a little bit, but it still maintains the shot values. So it takes a little while as it takes a little while to play St. Andrews and fall in love with it. It takes a little while to fall in love with most of the great golf courses, or a lot of them. Anyway, you gotta play it a lot. You gotta think about it a lot. And always the debate is good. Is it the worst course or is it the best course? Is this the worst hole or the best hole? These are good debates. But the idea is to get in players' heads, to give them interesting problems to solve, to give them risk reward holes, to give them ample opportunity to rise and fall up the leaderboard, but always to intrigue them. And that's what the TPC Sawgrass does. I don't know that you could find okay, St. Andrews is in another league, and Royal Melbourne, they're in another league. But just from a shot value standpoint, not from an aesthetic standpoint, because it was built in a swamp, but from a shot value standpoint, I can't think of a better golf course than the TPC Sawgrass. Can't think of one. Every single hole, if you look at one, you want to drive it down the right side. So you're trying to hit a little fade. You get in the fairway. Now, it's not easy to hit that fairway. It's one of the harder fairways to hit. Now, the green is asking for a draw. It's asking for a soft draw with a short iron. Okay, number two is asking for a draw off the tee. It's really hard to do that. It's hard to hit that fairway. It's asking for a cut into the green. Okay, 4 asks for a fade off the tee. It asks for a draw into the green. 7 asks for a draw off the tee and a fade into the green. As you go around that golf course, that's what 10 asks for: a draw off the tee, a fade into the green. The golf course gets in your head. The layups on all the par fives are very difficult. The most interesting par 5 layups in golf are the TPC Sawgrass. No free layup. Laying up on 2 if you get in trouble it's a pain in the butt. Laying up on 9 if you get in trouble, even if you're not in trouble, it's a pain in the butt. Laying up on 11, I still don't know where to lay up there. I still don't know where to lay up.
It's funny, the conversation Dante and I had before we came on here of just holes that torment us are par fives that you have no clue where to lay up, of
right.
where the comfortable spot is, because there is no comfortable spot.
Right.
It's probably one of the most tormenting par 5 options out there. So it's funny you touch on that, and talking about the analytics and then moving back into golf course architecture, just zoning out from this project and talking golf course architecture in the future in general. Now that we have all of this technology, we're in the technology age of TrackMan and everything's improving at such a rapid rate. Is this the way a lot of folks are looking at analytics and golf course architecture, or is this something that's still kind of being maybe explored by yourself and Agustin Pizá, is bringing these analytics and architecture into one and designing for specific groups of players?
Yeah, I would say, look, Robert Trent Jones Sr. was probably the first to bring analytics to. It's not like obviously in the golden age of architecture, those men were incredibly smart, and they sat around and they certainly thought about where players missed it. But from a data standpoint, Robert Trent Jones Sr. would send his sons out to monitor and catalog where shots were missed. And then he would make designs going forward. 1954 Balstraw, he had his sons out there looking at where the players were missing it, hitting it, and so forth. And he made changes to the design at Olympic for the 55 U.S. Open to accommodate that. In Oakland Hills, where they played the U.S. Open at 51, again, that was a Trent Jones Sr. golf course. He was trying to combat, after World War II and the Depression, he was the first architect to really think about what caused the players' heartache and how to combat the different distance of the wound ball that they had gained in the early 20th century. So he did a wonderful job of that. As we've moved into the last 20, 30 years, golf course architecture swung back to the golden age of architecture. It's more about angles and strategy and fun. I think that's probably why Crenshaw Core, they're incredibly passionate architects. So they pay homage to the game and golden age of architecture. But they get fun right. They get intrigue, fun, beauty, aesthetics are a part of it. But the question is here, who are you designing the golf course for? So most every golf course, if you think about it, there are 10,000 professional golfers in the world, roughly. I've done the math a fair bit. There's 50 million golfers. So the idea that you would design a golf course for tour pros is ludicrous. That is 0.0002% of the golfers. That's what professional golfers represent. They represent a field of golf that, it's funny, the influence they have, and yet they don't pay for golf. There's such a ridiculously small number of golf. They're not the people that pay for it or support it. They don't support it. The people that support it are the 50 other million people that play this game. And so most golf courses should be designed with them in mind. But TPC Sawgrass was designed for the best players, the best men players. And we want to do that with this golf course. Of course, we'll make it accommodations for recreational golfers. But the intrigue of this golf course, the novelty of it, is to go test yourself on a golf course against the best players in the world. Architecture is in a great spot right now. It's growing. My partner Augie, he has projects in Russia. Projects. He's got Middle East countries who are, they're recruiting him. We have a project in Mexico and South Texas, and who's busier than Gil Hance? Who's busier than Crenshaw Core? Who's busier than Tom Doak? Golf course architecture is booming right now.
It is, and it's so, as someone who I also studied architecture in college, is something that when I first got into it in like 2008, 2009, was told, well, golf course architecture is kind of slow. It's not really.
It was then.
So it absolutely was.
It was then.
It's extremely exciting to see all this architecture boom back in the golf industry, because there's so many, like you said, Gil Hance, there's so many Tom Doak that are just taking their own approaches and really being artists first, and then taking the back end of providing resort style courses too. The complexities yet like diversity of golf course architecture right now is an exciting time.
It really is. And you look, those guys they deserve a tip of the cap. I mean, Nicholas too. I mean, Nicholas, Nicholas, he's done so many projects, but along the way, it would have been part of Nicholas being such a prolific architect that would, likely interest all these other architects and think that they could get into it and make a living at it. But Doak is a fabulous writer. Gil Hance is a fabulous writer, and who speaks more passionately about golf course architecture than Ben Crenshaw. And within the industry, there's kind of this phrase when people are looking at a piece of land and thinking about what to design on it, it's what would Bill Core do? It's almost like, they're sitting there and like, well, what would Bill Core do? There's such respect and reverence for Bill Core in the industry. And they're great writers. And I think they've done a great job. Golf course architecture is a bit like loving and enjoying wine. You don't have to be a wine expert to enjoy wine, but the more you get into it, the more you learn about it, the more interesting it is. And the more you learn about it, if you can do it in a way that's not snobby, you can increase the enjoyment of other people's enjoyment in wine. And so I think they've done a great job. Doak's books are popular, and they're not just popular with golf course architects. People read them. Crenshaw and Core, they do such a great job about talking about architecture. Gil Hance, the same. My wife and I just went up and played the country club in preparation for the US Open next year. I was doing some homework. Bailey was up there doing a project for them, for the USGA. And you get to talking to Brendan Walsh, the director of golf there, and you're listening to Gil Hance. You can't listen to them without getting interested in golf course architecture. You just can't.
There's almost a reverence in the way they talk about it.
Yeah, it's like talking to Roger Parker. I think that's his first name, Parker. Who if you go read Parker, who's just talking about wine, you want to go buy the bottle. You're like, well, hell, can I really taste licorice? It's like, can you get there and you're like, can I really see, how they've shaped this landform to where it fits the backdrop? Like, can I see that? Or yeah, you're right. It does. I didn't even think about that. Look how they put the green in the saddle of that hill 300 yards back. Oh yeah, there it is. That's beautiful. And that tree wasn't there. They put it, and you're like, and that bunker really does mess with my optics. Yeah, it really does. It's like, oh yeah. And you start to think about it. You're like, oh, that's beautiful. There's so much thought that goes into it. And, the golden age of architecture was a time when, people weren't on TV. They weren't reading. They sat around and they thought. and they read. And, you know, you think about how many people contributed to Pine Valley. I don't even know. 20 of the best minds in architecture probably contributed to that place. You start to read about it, but it was the same of all of them. The same of Marion. It was the same with Riviera. You know, no doubt. It's funny. The first work of 4 different architects, the very first job C.B. McDonald did was national. First job Crump did was Pine Valley. Marion was the first work of the architect. And Pebble Beach was the first work, but it wasn't the first time they thought about golf course architecture. Those guys sat around in rooms smoking cigars, drinking cognac, talking about philosophy of architecture all day, because none of them worked. They were just rich, smart people. And, you know, I think pretty much everybody today has to work, but we can still sit around and talk about golf course architecture, and all of us get better for it.
Now, I know, you know, we could talk hours on it, because I think we're both just kind of nuts for the reasoning behind the madness on some of these golf courses, and the beauty in it as well. I know you've got to go here, so I'll ask you one last question, and kind of maybe we can ponder on it. Maybe you can answer it with us. If you had to have someone step on this property when it's finished, and kind of take one lasting impression from what it achieves, you know, you just talked about all these great golf course architects and the lasting impressions they've had as you sit around and listen to their discussions. If this achieves one lasting impression for someone stepping on this property, what's the end goal out of that?
I suppose that it because I also want to create a junior national camp there for the best young girls to start training them. But I suppose it's to bring the best out and put women golfers in the best possible light, to give them the best possible stage to show that, you know, they're incredible athletes. I mean, look, they are for sure, but I want to give them the best possible stage to do that. You know, if I could summon back somehow Marion Hollins, who incidentally is going to go into the Hall of Fame in 2021. She is the only person that built an 18-hole golf course for women. She did that in 1921 after she won the U.S. Women's Amateur. And by all accounts, it was an amazing course. It was Women's National Golf Club, and it lasted until the Depression of World War II took its toll. But, you know, if you know, I wish I could summon her back where she could take a look at it and go, you know, thumbs up, you know. But I told Lorena Choa, look, you're going to hit the first tee shot. If you drive it past these bunkers, I don't know whether I'll be mad or proud.
I had to shut it down.
Right. But anyway, that's the goal, is to put women in the best possible light, and to help the best young girls aspire to be great athletes. Because look, athletics isn't just about shining; it's about character development. It's about social adaptations. It's, you know, there's so much that goes into golf and sport, and that's what this whole project, the goal of this whole project is.
Awesome, Brandel. Well, I know you got to head out. As always, incredibly well spoken, and a great conversation. So I really appreciate the time taken out of your evening to join us.
Well, likewise. Thank you both for having me on. It's nice to meet you, at least telephonically here. I hope our paths cross somewhere down the road, and I look forward to listening to your podcast and watching you guys succeed.
I appreciate it,
Awesome.
and
Appreciate it.
always
Thank
a pleasure. You. Yes, sir.
Thanks so much. Cheers, fellas.
Bye.
Bye.
That's the stuff, one shot at a time.